here with us now on how the economy will be affected by the election and these issues on the table is Douglas Holtz-Eakin. He's former director of the Congressional Budget Office and an advisor to Republican Senator John McCain during his 2008 campaign. He joins us this morning from Washington. So we just gave you a sketch of the atmosphere here, Doug, with $100 billion offered up as a possibility of Republicans cutting. How do you balance with that?
You can't. Republicans who are saying that they can balance the budget strictly with discretionary spending are missing a real image of how large the hole is that we're in. For us to balance the budget will require a comprehensive, across-the-board approach to controlling spending. It'll take many years, but it's actually imperative that the United States get started with this because the deficit is so big we cannot tax our way out of it. It is so big we're never going to grow our way out of it, and it represents the greatest threat to future prosperity. So any responsible politician, Republican or Democrat, has to recognize this and start getting the spending under control now.
So if we see the Republicans take the House, as many project, are you saying we might see some sort of European-style austerity program?
I think the real question is how the president will react. If you look at the indicators for the election, they all point toward just enormous Republican gains. The generic poll, the Gallup generic ballot says that you pick up 56-odd seats. The early voting is predominantly Republican in contrast to history. So this is going to be a situation where the House is going to end up Republican. There's a chance the Senate could end up Republican. We have a president who has consistently talked about the deficit as an important issue, but has never put out a budget that came close to controlling debt. The real issue is how this president will lead post-election.
Well, I mean, within that, though, we've seen with that same polling that we're talking about here, maybe support for the GOP, but not necessarily support for the agenda. Or, I mean, so few people want to actually see their taxes go up or see their entitlements cut. So what are we really talking about here? Where do you take the knife to?
Well, I think you're right about the fact that this isn't a pro-Republican vote. I mean, this is a repudiation of what we've seen for the past 2 years. It's not any endorsement of the Republican agenda. So I think it's important for Republicans to recognize that. Important to recognize that in the polling we've seen, jobs is the #1 issue, federal spending is the #2 issue. They have to be serious about controlling spending. That will actually help the private economy. I believe this election will be beneficial for economic growth, and that's a start, but that's by no means completing the task.
Doug, we were talking about, you were saying basically the reality is the cutting is going to happen somewhere. Where specifically would you advise it to be?
Well, I think you have a couple of options depending on your time frame. I mean, everyone recognizes that there's a deal to be done on Social Security, that you can change the benefit formula so that future retirees get more than current retirees get, but less than promised, and bring the system into balance. That'd be desirable. You don't get much in the short term out of that. It takes a long time. Short term, you have to look at non-defense discretionary spending, which has grown very rapidly in the past couple of years. And you do have to look at the defense budget, which, while you might think it's sacrosanct, all of the annual efforts of the Pentagon indicate that we are funding not only the weapons and the capabilities we need to fight our current enemies, but some legacy systems from the Cold War, and we could lose those as well. So you've got to start with the discretionary to get quick gains. You've got to look at entitlements over the longer period. And the elephant in the room is healthcare. And there, I think the reality is that the new law is too expensive, and we will see it cut back before it is ever really implemented.
Choking off the funding there is what you're suggesting rather than a repeal. I want to quickly, let me just introduce Dean Baker, who has joined us in the conversation, former World Bank and JEC consultant, the author of many books on smaller government. I want to add in this other perspective, if I can here, Dean. Doug was just talking about Social Security as one place you could make some cuts, non-defense discretionary spending. Is that enough for you? Because I know you initially were looking for more stimulus from the Obama administration.
Yeah, well, a couple points here. Social Security, I think, is certainly not in need of cuts. I mean, people are desperately going to need that program because near retirees have seen their savings decimated by the collapse of the housing bubble and the plunge in the stock market. So I don't think we should be looking at cutting Social Security anytime soon. And the immediate issue has to be to get growth going, get jobs being created. And we're going the wrong way here. I mean, we had a very weak growth number. People don't appreciate growth in the third quarter. Pulling out inventories was just 0.6%. We're losing jobs, not creating them. So we need stimulus. We need something to boost the economy.
Doug, any way that would actually get through right now? And touch on the point that Dean just made, though, about there being a retirement crisis in this country. It's pretty hard politically to sell cutting Social Security.
That's because, as usual, it's misrepresented as somehow affecting seniors. Social Security reform is not about seniors. It's about today's young. Those are the ones who would be affected by such changes. Any Social Security reform would exempt current retirees, would exempt those near retirement. It's a non-issue for them. This is about people in their 20s and 30s and having a system that they can retire into. As far as near-term stimulus, we've seen the Keynesian stimulus game played, and it's not going to be played again. The country does need growth. It needs pro-growth policies that are more geared toward the business sector, which is the only sector that has the financial wherewithal to go out and spend. We've got to stop the onslaught of the new regulatory regime. You've got to maintain international competitiveness of our tax and regulatory policies. All of that's been missing for 2 years, and that's the message that this election is sending.
Dean, why isn't the extension of the Bush-era tax cuts stimulus enough for you?
Well, that actually is no net stimulus because it's already there. But the Keynesian stimulus game, as Doug called it, created 3 to 4 million jobs, according to the Congressional Budget Office, and in fact probably the vast majority of economic analysts. So I think that's a game we need a lot more of. Keynesian stimulus works. The problem was that we had a hole on the order of $1.2 trillion created by the lost private sector demand associated with the collapse of the housing bubble. If you look at the net government stimulus, what the federal government was putting out there, minus what state and local governments were taking back, it came to about $150 billion a year. So, I mean, that doesn't take a lot of arithmetic to figure out $150 billion a year in net stimulus from the public sector is not enough to offset $1.2 trillion in contraction from the private sector. So we got a big boost. It created a lot of jobs. It just wasn't nearly enough. You know, I'm happy we have an unemployment rate of 9.6% compared to 11 or 12%, which is where we'd be absent that stimulus.
Dean, why aren't you comfortable with leaving the onus on the Federal Reserve and their focus on monetary policy as a way to juice the economy right now? Why do you think more needs to be coming from the government itself?
Well, I mean, I'd love to see more aggressive action from the Federal Reserve. I mean, we really should try to get all the wheels going at the same time. The Federal Reserve thus far, I think, has been relatively meager given the severity of the downturn. And, we have Federal Reserve Board Chair Bernanke talking about having quantitative easing, additional quantitative easing, I should say. And that's a good thing. I don't think that's going to go far enough, though. We'll probably see some minor reduction in interest rates. That will be helpful, but it's just not the sort of thing you need. I mean, we're sitting here with 9.6% unemployment. We're about $1 trillion below the economy's potential level of output. I mean, what I'd like to see the Fed do is target a higher inflation rate, say 3 to 4%. I think that would help give the economy a boost. In fact, Bernanke had advocated that himself. Greg Mankiw had also advocated this, but Ben Bernanke had advocated this back when he was a professor at Princeton for Japan. So I'd just like to see him take his own recommendation.
Hey, Doug, I want you to pick up on the note Dean just left off on. He was pushing for inflation targeting from the Fed and more stimulus from the government itself.
Well, I think what Dean and I would agree with is that probably the Fed is not going to be enough to get this economy going. I don't think they should engage in the second round of quantitative easing. I don't think a couple $100 billion worth of purchases each month is going to change liquidity very much. That's not our problem. Moving long-term rates by 30, 40 basis points ultimately will not jumpstart the economy. The real issue is the nature of fiscal policy, what will be successful. My view is that we've been growing for over a year. We're just growing it at a very anemic rate. We ought to get serious about the kinds of policies that would allow this economy to grow at a faster, more sustained rate. And that would include a rate cut to our corporate rates so that we're internationally competitive. It certainly would include extending the tax law so we don't see a big tax increase at the end of this year. And I think the health care law lies at the center of this. If you talk to businesses, they cite the new laws as one of the major reasons they're hesitant to put employees on the books. It is a law that is deeply unpopular because it put the government in lines of business that people don't like. It's bad economic policy, it's going to prove to be bad health policy, and it's too expensive for us to afford. So if you want to get the budget deficit under control and you want to take off the table the fear of an interest rate spike or a large tax increase, you've got to address this new law.
Well, it sounds like you're talking to Doug about cutting future spending rather than existing programs. Dean, what do you say to that?
Well, I would say that over the long term, we absolutely do have a healthcare cost problem. I wouldn't say it's President Obama's program. The problem predated the healthcare program. I should just point out, I know businesses are all saying they aren't hiring because of the healthcare plan, but there's really no evidence to support that position. If that were really true, what we'd expect to see is a spike in hours. In other words, they'd be working their existing workforce more hours, and also they'd be hiring temps. And neither of that's happening. Hours are up a little bit from the trough, but not by very much, and well below what they were before the beginning of the recession. And temp hiring, again, that's up a little bit from the lows we were at last fall, but we're way below temps, the level of temps in the economy from before the recession started. So, this is one of the things. Business people complain. They always complain. They always want lower taxes. They always want less regulation. They always want to pay their workers less. That's fine. That's what they do. That's what they're paid for. But that doesn't mean the rest of us should take that seriously. Now, over the long term, of course, as I was saying, we do have to fix our health care costs. It's not a public sector problem. It's a health care problem. We pay more than twice as much per person as any other country in the world. It's projected to go to 3 and 4 times as much.
Right.
That's not sustainable. So we have to fix that.
Right. Well, it sounds like you've got the promise of a possibly Republican House saying they're going to control the purse strings on that issue as they see it. Let's check back in with you guys. We got to leave it there for today. And it's great getting both of your perspectives there.